The great digital deletion has begun. In July 2025, you woke up to a different Steam store. Hundreds of games just gone. This wasn't a bug. This was the first shot fired in a war for your digital rights. And the people who pulled the trigger are hoping you won't even notice. What's happening isn't just about a few controversial indie games. It's about whether you truly own the games you pay for, or if your entire hobby can be held hostage by a handful of corporations you've probably never even thought about. This is the story of the great digital deletion, and it has already begun. So, what exactly went down in July 2025? It all started with a quiet, overnight purge. Hundreds of games, many of them from independent developers, were suddenly retired from Steam. They weren't just delisted from the store, they were essentially erased from the marketplace. At first, the community assumed it was a glitch, a mistake that would be corrected. But then Valve released a statement. Valve confirmed the removals were deliberate. The company said it was retiring games that may violate the rules and standards set forth by our payment processors. This wasn't about Valve's own content policy. This was about an outside force dictating what could and could not be sold on the world's biggest PC gaming platform. The initial targets were mostly games with adult or sexually explicit themes, some with tags related to controversial topics. But it wasn't just Steam. Almost at the same time, the indie platform itch.io denexed thousands of NSFW games, making them impossible to find through search or browsing. They were forced to act to protect their core payment infrastructure, basically to stop their entire platform from being financially blacklisted. This wasn't a coordinated attack by the platforms themselves. It was a coordinated squeeze from the outside, and it revealed a terrifying weak spot in the very foundation of digital distribution. If Valve and itch.io didn't want to do this, who was pulling the strings? The answer is as simple as it is alarming. The companies that handle your money: Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, and Stripe. These financial giants, the invisible middlemen in almost every online purchase you make, have become the de facto censors of the internet. Here's how it works. These payment processors don't go after one specific game they don't like. That would be too direct, too obvious. Instead, they set broad, vague standards for what they consider high risk. Then, they go to a platform like Steam and give them an ultimatum: get rid of all the content we find objectionable, or we will cut off our payment services for your entire store. Think about that for a second. It is the financial equivalent of a nuclear option. For Steam, losing access to MasterCard or Visa would be catastrophic. It would mean millions of customers could no longer buy any games. From Palworld to Baldur's Gate 3 to the next big indie hit. Faced with the choice between delisting a few hundred niche titles or having their whole business crippled, Valve's hand was forced. They chose to amputate a finger to save the arm. This isn't a partnership, it's a hostage situation, and every game on the platform is part of the collateral. So where did all this pressure suddenly come from? How did these games pop up on the radar of multi-billion-dollar financial institutions? The trail leads back to an Australian activist group called Collective Shout. Describing itself as a movement against the objectification of women, the group has a long history of campaigning against media they find harmful. According to reports, after their emails to Valve about certain games went unanswered, Collective Shout changed its strategy. They bypassed the gaming platforms entirely and went straight for the financial jugular, the payment processors. They launched a lobbying campaign, encouraging supporters to send thousands of emails and calls to companies like Visa and MasterCard, arguing that they were facilitating payments for and profiting from games that normalized abuse. It was brutally effective. The payment processors, always terrified of brand risk and public controversy, caved. A relatively small but highly organized group had successfully weaponized the terms of service of financial companies to enforce their moral standards on the entire digital market. They proved you don't need to win a public debate or change a law to censor content. You just need to find the right choke point in the system and squeeze. When confronted, the payment processors hide behind a wall of corporate doubles. MasterCard released a statement claiming they have not evaluated any game or required restrictions, and that they simply allow all lawful purchases on our network. This is a masterclass in telling the truth while lying. They don't have to order a specific game be taken down. They just enforce their own internal rules, like MasterCard's Rule 5.12.7, which deals with brand-damaging transactions. The problem is, these rules are intentionally vague. What, exactly, makes something a brand risk to MasterCard? Today, it's adult-themed games. But what about tomorrow? Is a game that's critical of corporate power a brand risk? Is a game that accurately shows the horrors of a war that a company's board members want to ignore a brand risk? It is an LGBTQ+ game that offends a conservative lobbying group in a key market a brand risk? The answer is, it's a risk if they say it is. They have given themselves the power of judge, jury, and executioner, operating completely outside of any democratic or legal framework. They have become a global, unaccountable censorship board for digital content. This is the system we're now living under. It's complex, it's hidden, and it affects every single one of us. If you believe in these kinds of deep dive investigations that hold these systems accountable, consider subscribing or joining the channel. Your support is what makes it possible to keep digging. This is why this is about so much more than a few NSFW games that most of us have never even played. The mechanism of financial censorship, once it's normalized, can be used to target anything. Political speech, religious views, controversial artists, all vulnerable. This gets to the heart of the pain point so many of us feel. The slow, creeping erosion of ownership. This is the same fight as the Stop Killing Games movement, which was started after Ubisoft shut down The Crew, making a game that people had paid for completely unplayable. That movement fights for the simple idea that when you buy a product, it shouldn't be destroyed by the seller later on. The great digital deletion is the next front in that war. You spent your money. You thought you bought a product, and then, one day, a banker in a boardroom who has never played a video game in his life decided it was a brand risk, and it was wiped from the digital marketplace. This isn't just about losing access to buy a game. It's about being told that your purchase was never truly a purchase. It was only a temporary license, subject to the whims of a payment processor's PR department. That is a fundamental violation of our rights as consumers. So, are we powerless? Not entirely. The backlash to the delistings was immediate and fierce. A Change.org petition protesting the power of financial companies to censor legal content gathered over 150,000 signatures. Gamers began organizing, flooding Visa and MasterCard with emails and calls, using the activists' own tactics against them. Developers and industry bodies like the IGDA have called for more transparency and fairness. Platforms are being forced to look for alternatives. Some have discussed a wider adoption of cryptocurrencies or other decentralized payment methods to sidestep the traditional financial system, though these have their own major problems. Others are actively searching for new payment partners who are more tolerant of creative expression. Ultimately, this may require government intervention. There's a growing argument that payment processors have become essential public utilities. Like a phone company or an electric company, they shouldn't be allowed to arbitrarily deny service for legal products based on vague, ideological objections. They have become too powerful and too unaccountable, and it's time for regulation to catch up. The great digital deletion of July 2025 was a wake-up call. It proved that our digital culture is far more fragile than we ever imagined. It's built on corporate goodwill and subject to the shifting tides of financial policy and activist pressure. A dangerous precedent has been set, where a handful of financial firms in the middle of a transaction hold all the power. This is a fight for the future of all digital media. It will decide whether the internet stays a place of creative freedom and consumer choice, or becomes a sanitized, curated space where nothing that might offend a credit card company is allowed to exist. We have to demand more from the platforms we use and the processors they depend on. We must support consumer movements, demand transparency, and make it clear that we will not accept a future where our ability to buy legal products can be deleted on a whim. They've started with games they thought we wouldn't defend. The question is, where do they stop? And what will be left on the store when they're done?